In our discussion, we're going to see we're going to learn how wisdom cools conflict. It acts as a thermostat. How wisdom restrains and guards our speech so we don't just say anything that pops in our mind. Keep that out of that. And we're going to see how trusting in the Lord, when we really put our trust in the Lord, how we don't really care what people think. We don't really going to seek that anymore. We're just going to worry about what the Lord thinks. So, Logan, if I asked you, I'm going to ask you this. Let me start it off with, I'm going to ask you this. Do you agree, or if you think it's different, let me know. Do we live in a time when outrage speeds faster than wisdom? Words spoken get out there and just cause all sorts of trouble. And would you agree that fear quietly governs the decisions that a lot of people make over faith in God?
Sadly, yes.
Okay, so the verses that are picked for today's discussion, I want you to go ahead and read. If you have your phone, we're going to start with Proverbs 29, and we're going to start with verse 8.
Scoffers set a city aflame, but the wise turn away wrath.
The wise turn away wrath. This verse here, verse 8, is really pointing to this, that foolish speech, or we can engage in speech sometimes that is incendiary. It burns. That's why Solomon is saying scoffers set a city ablaze. So really a key thought here, when we're looking at what Solomon is trying to communicate, scoffers, this word comes from a Hebrew word that means people who mock, people who provoke, people who inflame with their words. In fact, in 950 BC, when about the time Solomon is writing this, the word that we get scoffers from in the Hebrew carries the idea of someone who uses their words as a weapon. They're always a weapon. And words can be offensive weapons or they can be defensive weapons. But what do weapons do?
Yeah, well, it's like a tool. I mean, you can either use it for good or you can use it as a weapon and hurt somebody with it. So it's really what you choose to do with your words.
But what Solomon is telling us, that our words, if we don't choose them with wisdom, will inflame the situation and burn the whole town down. In fact, this word in the Hebrew that we get scoffers from was used in that time frame describing someone who never uses their words to bring about peace. They only use them to cause destruction.
I like that the kind of destruction is a flame specifically because a flame spreads. And so as opposed to any other kind of, destruction, this is something that starts with one person who uses incendiary rhetoric and that spreads through gossip. And I think that's something that I didn't catch when I first read this, which is it's not just one person saying something. It's they say it and then the whole crowd goes crazy. And that's why the whole city's ablaze, because everybody's saying the same thing. And unfortunately, I think you would agree with me, politically, non-politically, doesn't matter. We kind of have like a hive mind sometimes, don't we? Yeah. Like we all want to think the same thing. And when somebody, says something inflammatory, we all just kind of want to take the bait and just go with it and agree with that.
Absolutely. You hit on a good point, because verse 8 is telling us that a single voice, just one voice, can raise the temperature, start a fire in a family, in a church community, in the city, like he's using here, Solomon's using here. Just one person with their words can burn the whole thing down. So what he's saying here also, when you really look at the nuance and how this word is used here, how verse 8 is being used, Solomon is telling us that wisdom will never escalate the problem. So when we're using words and it's escalating to the point that where it's going to get out of control, we should know as believers, I'm not using words of wisdom because this is escalating.
You may not always feel like 100% confident you're being wise in a situation, but a telltale sign that you're not is if things are getting worse and more inflammatory. If you're in a conversation and it starts to become accusatory or like just negative, even if you thought you were on the right track at the beginning, you got to pull back and say, wait a second, I started off with a wise thought and now I'm reacting and I'm not really producing wisdom as I speak. I'm just reacting.
That's a very good point. That's what he's communicating here. I think a lot of the social media stuff is just random drive-by, throwing an incendiary word in just to see what you can cause, what kind of problem you can cause, and that lacks wisdom. And when we engage in that, we're lacking wisdom, is what Solomon is saying.
Not only engaging in it when it comes to producing these unwise things, whether it be like tweeting out something stupid or, posting a video or picture or reposting something. Not only is that unwise, it's also unwise, hate to step on toes, but to even engage in an environment where the algorithm is favoring that sort of incendiary stuff. Because whether or not I'm going to sit this one out and be wise, if you're still getting into this environment knowingly, and I'm not just saying, hey guys, don't use social media. Obviously, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is it's wise to even avoid places like that create that kind of rhetoric. So like, just because you're not adding to it doesn't mean that you're completely blameless if you're literally just consuming this all day. Like, what do you think you're going to output if you're constantly inputting unwise, just incendiary crap?
Yep. That's 100%. Just don't go there. Then you won't even get tempted to get throwing incendiary words in.
Last time we were talking, I was thinking about that idea of kind of like winning the battle before you even, like the walls analogy is what I was thinking of. Wisdom being, self-control being a wall is kind of like the same thing as saying it's wise to even have a barrier of where you don't go or what you don't allow in. It's not just simply how you handle an invasion. It's like stopping the invasion to begin with, right? So why would you go into like enemy territory on whether it be, well, let's say maybe you are particularly prone to, rage bait on Twitter or something like that. Why do you have Twitter? It's like you're going in with your walls down if you're choosing to go into a place that has this kind of right. And I'm not just dogging on social media, but the idea stands, whether it be on social media or in real life. If you're going places and I'm going to be wise when I get there, don't even go there if you think it's just going to generate such conflict. I mean, it's just, there's no need.
Better to avoid.
Totally.
I get you. That's a good point. The political and social polarization of today is a prime example of lacking wisdom. And how many times do we get caught up on trying to be or thinking we're on the right team when it comes to all this stuff? How about just avoid it? It is what it is. Just don't throw incendiary word bombs into something that's not going to, that shows lacking wisdom, according to what Solomon is saying. Family and church conflicts, unfortunately, are ruled by the tone of the words that we use versus wisdom-filled words. And I think those are all things that Solomon is warning us against here in verse 8. And we find New Testament tie-ins to that. James 1, verse 19 and 20 tells us we've been saying this all along. I think I said it 3 weeks ago. We said it last week, that we need to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and even slower to anger. Titus 3:2, Paul says it this way: wisdom speaks no evil of people. It doesn't throw incendiary bombs. It doesn't pick out the negative and just focus on that. It says we're gentle with our words. You can't throw an incendiary word bomb and be gentle at the same time, can you?
Yeah, no.
That's like jumbo shrimp. It's an oxymoron. It can't happen.
Don't get me started on that heated topic. I'll say unwise things.
So Solomon here in verse 8 is telling us that not every fire that's out there needs you and I to come along and throw gas on it, which in the old nature or just that's what we do best, is we throw incendiary bombs. We see a fire going, hey, let's give it some fuel. Solomon is telling us that these fires that are burning in the city, in your home, in the church, they probably need wisdom to extinguish it versus fuel to add to it.
I think gossip's one of the best examples of that I can think of. That's something that we all are so quick to jump into. Oh, yeah. it feels so benign to just like be a part of the conversation, but even just entertaining like an in-depth conversation about stuff you should not be discussing about somebody else. It's like, even if you're just kind of listening and interested in the conversation, you're already kind of part of the problem with spreading the fire, because you're signaling to the other people unwisely, hey, this is a fun topic. Let's keep entertaining this, when in reality, you should be controlling the temperature by being like, hey guys, do we need to be talking about them like this behind their back like that? Like, is that really, obviously, you got to balance being a quote unquote killjoy or whatever. That's like, the issue is if you're afraid of being a killjoy, not to jump ahead at some verses we're going to talk about in a minute, but if you're so worried about being a killjoy that you just let gossip happen, you're just letting it spread. So you got to be that thermostat and just turn it down.
And, Christians, believers are bad about gossiping through, pray for so-and-so.
Yeah, God bless her soul. Yeah, God bless her, she blank. Yeah.
Or, did you hear what he did? Blah, 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 blah. How about let's just pray for him and not give out the sordid, nasty details of it unless that person wants to share it, because that's gossiping through prayer. And we wonder why sometimes our prayers are weak. Solomon is telling us that's an incendiary device when we go to speak. Gossip is huge. It's huge. We should ask ourselves, based on verse 8, am I calming the room? Am I calming the situation, or am I heating it up? Are you thermostats of wisdom that we can actually control the temperature through the wisdom of our words, thoughts, and actions?
I think this whole thermostat idea and lowering the temperature, I think it really is colored with more detail once you think about what we talked about in our last episode on the YouTube channel, which is the idea that you're not simply turning the temperature down by just people pleasing and just, hey guys, Jesus actually says, I don't come to make peace. I come to basically wreck the place when it comes to the expectations, when it comes to the misunderstanding about religiosity, when it comes to, I'm here to break down church-anese, as you like to say. Jesus came with the intention of, not of peace in terms of like the status quo, but a destruction of that. But what's so fascinating is he is advocating constantly for turning the other cheek, being a peacemaker. And if you think about all these ideas kind of combining into Christ as the ultimate example of how we should be when it comes to turning the temperature down, but yet still being aggressively in pursuit of the truth in an unwavering fashion, I think this whole temperature idea really makes more sense. And I think it's most accurate when you think about the idea that you're not just turning it down by people pleasing, you're turning it down by saying true things, but in a timing in which edifies and it builds up and encourages, it slows down the incendiary rhetoric.
And that's wisdom, though. That's why we know. That's a good point. Will you read our next verse to be Proverbs 29:20?
Verse 20 says, do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him.
Oh, there's more hope for a fool than him. So I guess we really need to look over and see what Solomon is talking about when he says, do you see a man who is hasty in his words? Because he finishes it off with, this is something you don't want to be, because when you see fool in Proverbs, it's probably not going to be in a positive. You don't want to be in that category, that camp, right? So in verse 20 here, Solomon is telling us that there is a huge danger when we just jump into words, when we just jump into things with haste, when we go, as we say, put our foot in our mouth. Very dangerous. So this word hasty in verse 20 comes from a Hebrew word that means to press. So you could even be in, the word says hasty in words. It's also to press your words. You ever know anybody that just keeps pressing you and pressing you and pressing you, even though you kind of rebuffed them or kind of shift the conversation, but they keep pressing?
Definitely.
Also, it says hasty here, but it means to rush into things. Just don't even think. You just rush into your words, rush into your decisions. Not a good thing. But the one that I find when you look at the definition and how this word can be used, that we get hasty here in this verse, from the Hebrew word utz. It means to be very narrow, narrow-minded, narrow in scope. In other words, the words we use, they're right. They're always right. And I'm going to be rigid. I'm not going to bend because I'm always right. That's a bad place to be. It's telling us that hasty speech bypasses any type of spiritual reflection, any type of spiritual discernment, any type of wisdom, because we're just jumping in. You say something, I'm just going to respond. And if you said something hurtful, I'm going to respond with something hurtful. You say something stupid, I'm going to say something stupid. You know what I'm saying? Speaking impulsively during emotionally charged situations and conversations demonstrates that we lack the wisdom that Solomon is teaching us that we need all throughout this book of Proverbs. I think really what Solomon is stressing here in this verse, there needs to be a serious weight. You know, we gotta really restrain our words. Learn to restrain don't say the first thing that pops into your mind. Restrain it. Let wisdom filter it before we even speak. So, need to hear the person out, not feeling their words for them per se. Solomon is telling us that true wisdom will listen to what they say, because a lot of times when we're talking, especially if it's a heated discussion, we'll start formulating an answer before that person's even completed their thought. Ever been guilty of that? I have, you know. And so Solomon is saying true wisdom is pause your thought on what you're going to respond until you hear them totally out, which I have work to do.
Yeah, me as well, definitely.
And then framing our words and responses with wisdom is of paramount importance if you want to keep that thermostat working in the right direction. So James tells us that unbridled speech shows that you don't really have the faith that you should. Like your faith is not really where it should be in the Lord. If anyone considers themselves religious but does not control their tongue, they deceive themselves, and their religion is, as he says, worthless.
Well, yeah, it's clear that if you're fearing the Lord, you're not going to act that way. And if religion isn't fearing the Lord, what is it? You know, like if you're not literally acting as if the Lord has told you what to do and given you the right path, and you're not even on that path, do you really fear him at all? Or do you just say, yeah, I'm a Christian religiously? Are you a Christian if you don't even follow the path? What is a Christian? It's a Christ follower. And so if you're not following him, even in the simple moments that you think may not matter, whether you're gossiping, you're using incendiary language, whatever it is, it's like the proof really is in the pudding. And that's what I think was being said there.
It is. And just remember, every word we use, according to Matthew 12:36, we're going to be held accountable for it. So the more words of wisdom we use, the better off we're going to be. And so I'm not always good at that. So takeaway, I would say quick words, reacting in haste, often produce short-term and long-lasting consequences. We want to cause a problem, just jump in and use quick words, and you're going to just exacerbate whatever problem that you were already in the middle of. Not rushing in with our words requires spiritual fruit. It requires self-control. It requires discernment, and it requires right here what Solomon is talking about, true wisdom. And there is a big difference between just shouting off at the mouth and using words of wisdom. So that means that we should probably ask ourselves, am I responding with my words? Do they show wisdom? Or do I just react in haste? Do I just spout out whatever first thing that pops in my mind you get to receive? So we need to really work on that, I think, as a believer. So last verse, you can read Proverbs 29:25, and then we can run outside and play in the snow.
Yay! Okay, so verse 25, the fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe.
Now, how many times in Scripture do you think fear is mentioned?
It's got to be a lot. I could be so wrong. I'm not even going to guess an exact number. I don't know.
Okay, 400 times in the ESV. Because, I mean, if you do it different translations, you might find 5 or 10 more. I don't know. But 400. It's a little over 400 for the ESV. That's a lot of mentions on fear, and that's fear in different capacities, just different kind of fear. So what Solomon is talking about here in verse 25 is a special kind of fear, not a special kind of fear. It's one I think that a lot of people deal with. It is fearing what people think about you. So we will pattern our thoughts, or not our thoughts, but our words, our actions, how we act around people, because we fear what they think about us. We want to impress them, or whatever the case may be. But what he's saying here, Solomon, in verse 25, is that type of fear traps us and it restrains us. It doesn't help you blossom as a person. It's not going to help the relationship. It's not going to help your relationship with God. It just snares you. It keeps you in fear. He's telling us that we don't need to be people pleasers. We don't need to be men or women of compromise. We don't need to be men and women of silence. Because a lot of times we won't say what we know to be true or right because we fear what people are going to think.
Yep. And that's why I like these verses that we've been talking about together, because if you think that you're being wise by not saying anything, but what you're really doing is just trying to avoid confrontation on a topic, that's not holy. That's not good. That's not wise. You're just being passive. Yep. So you got to know when is the time to speak, when is the time to be silent, and you can't let the fear of man dictate, okay, I'm afraid of God. I feel like I need to do what he's telling me to do, but I'm even more afraid of what this person's going to think if I say it. I'm just going to pretend like I'm wise and shut my mouth. Nope. That's passivity. That's not being wise.
Actually, I read this verse here. You just read it. It says, the fear of man lays us snare. So we're worried about what men say. We're people pleasing and all that sort of stuff. But when you keep reading, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. So we're going to do it out on paper. There's a contrast here. Do I care more about what people think, or do I care more about what the Lord thinks? That's the dividing line. Is what that this verse boils down to that. And I'm afraid that a lot of times the vast majority of believers, it appears, care more about what people think than versus what the Lord thinks. And if we lived our life caring more about what the Lord thinks than what people think, then Solomon is telling us that our life is going to be more fulfilled. We're not going to have a lot of not going to be riddled with mistakes, and we're going to stay on a trajectory that allows us to grow spiritually and all that. So we live in a cancel culture. I remember back a few years ago, you couldn't say anything without being canceled. Man, you could look at somebody, wear an old Atlanta Braves t-shirt with an American Indian on it, canceled, So in that world, believers started to not say the truth. They skirted the issue of transgenderism. They skirted the issues of gay marriage. They skirted the issues of abortion. And now look where we're at. Because we cared more about what people think than what God says. And God speaks against all that. And we should be, speaking against it too. Let's not fall victim to worrying about what people say. If they're going to cancel you for telling the truth, hey, wear it with the C. Badge of honor. I got canceled because I spoke the truth. Galatians 1:10, if you want a New Testament tie-in, says, seek God's approval over man's. Always. That's what we need to live by. Matthew 10:28 tells us to fear God, not people. And if we do that, then we're going to develop wisdom. We're living in a way that wisdom will abound in our life. Takeaway is this. What we fear, if it's people, that's going to control us. So who wants to be controlled by worrying about what people think? I don't. When we trust in God, according to Solomon, that breaks the trap of the approval addiction. It could be an addiction for some people, just worried about what people think. Here's the ask. Whose opinion has the loudest voice in our life? Is it man's or is it God's? We need to really care about his opinion. And our final thoughts for today, before we close out, be a thermostat. Don't run around in life being an incendiary device. Let wisdom control the temperature of the conversation, of the conflict, or however you live in life. Slow speech is actually strength. When we sit and think about it before we speak, it's not weakness. It is showing wisdom and strength. Fearing God means you're not going to be trapped what people think. So don't always try to be a people pleaser. Let's be God pleasers.
You have to trust that God's plan for you, if it may conflict with people pleasing, isn't just going to blow up your relationships. Like, God's whole point is not, hey, trust me and don't worry about them and do something that's going to like get you ruined. Like, maybe it ruins you like by getting canceled or whatever, but you're never ruined in God's eyes. And being situated well with him means that you're best positioned to reconcile with people in your life that you need to reconcile with, to make peace with people that you need to make peace with. Like, all the issues of relationships we have, if we trust God and we don't get caught up in the snare of worrying about what other people think when it conflicts with what God tells us to do, if we know what God tells us to do, we've got to do it even when it feels like it's sacrificing someone else's, being proud of you or looking up to you or validating you in some kind of vain way. If you're more worried about doing what God tells you to do, you're not going to be trapped in snares like that.
Exactly. And you know what? I think the last thought we'll say is this: wisdom cools what foolishness ignites.
Beautiful.